We're going to kick off in just a moment. And before we do, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping, if I may. So today we're going to be focusing on the virtual learning journey, and the focus is on the emerging learner. This is very much brought from the group that was with us on last month's webinar. And so we wanted to focus in on that because that was a particular interest for a lot of people. We'll get to that in just a second. My name is Patrick Thomas, and I'm here in London, and I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar alongside my colleague Rose Benedicts, who's in the United States. We both work in Leo's consulting team. So just to give you a bit of a sense of how today is going to run and the structure of the webinar. So picking up from last month's webinar where we talked about virtual learning journeys and how to engage learners over a longer period of time. That was done with Andrew Jolly and myself. The group posed, and many of you are returning, which is fab. The group posed quite a few questions that were all really good and really do need a bit more airing than what we could answer sort of on the fly in the webinar. So we wanted to make sure that we got a chance to answer those questions today. So we've grouped a lot of those questions. We've also taken some of the questions that people posted to us with the invitation of this webinar. We've got those in here, and we'll go through and answering those. And a lot of the questions that were coming in had to do with the principles of engaging learners and in a virtual context and what that means. And so we did a bit of research around virtual learners online. What does that mean? Are there new types of archetypes of learners? And we want to share that research with you and open up the discussion. So keep your fingertips close to your keyboards. I see that you're all using the questions pane. We're going to use the questions pane to both collect your questions, and we're going to keep looking to the questions pane to spot questions as they come in. So feel free to ask questions as we go. We're also going to compile them. So if we've got some time at the end of the webinar, Lindsay, who is in the background, she's our producer. She'll be helping us to compile the questions, and we'll then address them in a QA as well. So, but we're going to do it on the fly as well. So keep your fingers close to the keyboards. Feel free to ask questions as you go. And without further ado, let me introduce myself a little bit more. So I'm Patrick Thomas, and I'm a consulting lead with the organization. I've been with the organization for going on 14 years now. Generally, I'm working with clients that are global in nature, probably plus 10,000 employees. So big spread of roles and geographies. And I tend to focus on where content and technologies need to flex to meet the needs of the organization. Rose, if I can hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Rose Benedicts. My title is Strategic Consulting Lead. Basically, Patrick and I do the same thing. We tend to, Patrick tends to look at content and technology and looks at very large and global organizations. I sort of don't have a specific type of organization I work with. I specifically work in the area where learning meets the business. Take a look at that, although Patrick does that as well. I'm a bit playful and innovative in terms of design and looking at how to make strategy more humanized, and then how to make specific programs a bit more humanized. So that's my niche. I'm often called a geek or a nerd, and I honestly love it because that just means I'm really passionate about what I do. So there you go.
Thanks, Rose.
Yeah.
Just to orient you as to who we are as an organization, Leo is part of a larger group called Learning Technologies Group. It is made up of both technologies companies and services companies. So we have LMSs on one side and technologies there in the form of, say, OpenLMS or Instilled or PeopleFluent. Then we've also got on the services side, we've got things like Gomo, which does really lovely responsive authoring, and Rust-C software, who help the interoperability of LMSs and creating standards for LMSs, and Watershed, who has an LRS and a learning experience and learning analytics platform for measuring the effectiveness of a design. And so together, it's really becoming an intriguing and fun mix of companies that we get to dip into along the way.
Yeah.
Leo specifically, we are really focused in on strategy and content and how that content is wrapped up in terms of, say, games design or scenario design. We've got specialists who help build out technologies and platforms to make sure that that content meets, lands and is delivered correctly. And our vision is to help you lead your revolution in your organization.
Yeah, I want to, if you don't mind, Patrick, I want to just jump in there because that's going to be a bit of a theme as Patrick and I discuss the questions and present some of our research. We meet you where you are, right? Revolution looks different. And one of the key things from our learner archetypes and our research is that concept of meeting the learner where he or she is. And that's going to be a recurring theme. So I kind of like that, what we're talking about when we talk about how we service the business and how we service L&D organizations within businesses is also mirrored when we get down to the very tactical or practical execution of how designers and facilitators are considering different learner types. As to that, I would love it if you could all humor me a bit with answering this question. If you have like 2 or 3 words, describe now in this virtual world, right, where we're doing a lot more virtual learning, who's your most challenging learner? This might be easy to answer. This might be easier to answer if you're doing the designing or the facilitation, but also if you're in the business, who do you perceive? I would love to hear it. So if you don't take a couple minutes to post into the questions. We've got a lot. Let's see. Afraid of technology, disaffected. I love that. Non-committal, too busy, distracted. They know what.
Unable to troubleshoot. That's hilarious.
That's from 8 degrees in Ottawa, Canada. I'm too hot to troubleshoot right now.
The disengaged.
Skip the training, just do their jobs.
Yeah. Mr. Know-it-all. Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing that because you've done this so quickly, that this is really sensitive for the majority of people. Like, exactly who your troublesome learners are.
I like somebody here keeping it real. Young and distracted. Refuses to engage in the session. Treats a web learning session as if it were a static, unidirectional webinar, not unlike what we're subjecting you to.
Yeah.
Digiphobes, that's a great word.
Yeah, there's a couple there where learning or digital is a distraction that takes you away from the job.
Yeah, that's great. So some of the themes we saw there were the people who are distracted, who don't want to be there, who don't engage, as well as the people who think they know everything already.
Yeah.
The people who are, multitasking, not paying attention, those kinds of things. That's great. We're going to explore all of that when we look at the learner archetypes.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're going to come back to that and reflect on that a bit more.
Yeah, so we're going to start there, and what we'd like to do today, specifically, this is the agenda, is the recap of the last webinar. Patrick will talk about it. This is a very high level. Not going to spend a lot of time there, but then get into your questions about virtual learning. These questions came from a mix of questions that some people asked during the last webinar, as well as questions that you might have submitted when you registered for this one. We will be presenting the actual question that was asked and then Patrick and I will discuss it and force each other to answer. Then we'll look at online learner archetypes. That's where I'm going to present some of the research that we've done. When we say research, we mean there's a lot of definitely extant data review, and content review, literature review, but there's also, from our experience, what we've seen work, a bit of evidence-based is so on. I've also done research into the, like gamer profiles and other online social presence profiles and so on. And we sort of amalgamized that and synthesized that into something that we believe makes a lot of sense and that we use internally when we're working with our partners. And then we'll go into your questions, the specific questions that you submitted when you registered about those learner archetypes. You may find a lot of them were answered when we present our research on the archetypes, but we definitely wanted to, with respect to you, show you that we have actually grabbed those and I want to hit them. And then we'll just leave you with our top tips, the key messages to take away. So Patrick, on the 29th of April, you did something special.
Yeah, we did. We got the conversation going, which was pretty exciting. So we talked about digital learning journeys stepped over time, and we talked about how they are really an invaluable tool or design method to be considering, and not just because your options are limited now and say the last 2 months because virtual is the only way that you can do it, but because blends actually work. We talked also about the research and science behind, or what supports behavior change and modifying behaviors in the workplace. We went into as well tools and techniques when you are in a virtual world, so what tools to use to sort of shift. So the from to matrix there when you're shifting from a face-to-face to a virtual world, and what to consider there. And then we went through and provided some case studies and some examples all throughout, just to kind of anchor what's happening in the real world. And it was a large group, much like today's is, with great feedback. So really want to thank you for all of that. And with some of the questions that we've had, you can see that we're going to group them as we go. The one that we're going to come back to is the question that was above about that challenging learner, and how do we address them. So, still sticking to the theme of the virtual learning journey, how do we focus in on supporting learners of different types? So let's go on to the questions. Yeah. So we grouped them by themes. If others come up right now, go ahead and add them into the questions pane. But the first one is, and one that we thought we'd start out with is, we've been fielding the last couple of months queries, both via email, online, and in our webinar sessions about, talk to us about how our strategy needs to adapt now in this new world. So what do we need to be considering in our strategy? There was a specific question from the group around what should be included in our 3-year strategy. And then sort of the other side of that is, what do we need to be doing to service the business right now? How do we best service the business now?
Yeah, there's sorry, Patrick, there's some, I think that we also experienced what we perceived to be a bit of confusion between these two. So we experienced some questions coming in, even through an RFP process, around, we need a strategy, but when we dug deeper, what we really found out is there's a business need right now, how do we meet it? So there's a bit of disambiguation here that needs to happen as well. And we just found so much in here, we thought, great. And Patrick is brilliant, so I asked if he wouldn't mind jumping in here and talking about this part.
So in thinking about the strategy, and let's be sure, when your leaders are coming to you and saying, what's your strategy for getting us through this? I know that to ask the question, is this about getting us over this hump, which is critical and a business imperative, or is this really about, what does our strategy look like in the long haul. So beyond this hump, beyond a particular program, beyond moving from face to face, but what is the strategy? What is the strategy going to include? And typically, a strategy should include these all 10 of these areas. So it should be reflecting the business strategy. Absolutely. So you're going to need to have some close alignment to the business strategy, and have a unique vision that's appropriate to your context. The processes that underpin the new strategy, the governance that's going to need to be in place, whether you're going to hold the budget for all learning, all the way down to who's implementing the plans and who's looking after the learning ecosystem. Your measurement strategy needs to be pretty clearly articulated in this strategy, as well as close alignment to the technologies. I'm arguing that the L&D function needs to get pretty darn close to IT and business information teams, so that your strategy in terms of the learning technologies that you have across the field are well considered by the IT and business information team, as much as you are appreciating the work that they've got to do to implement the changes that you're going to be asking for. So what's the roadmap for getting there? Is it 3, is it 5 years? That should be defined. What are the design changes or channels that you're going to be using? The principles that you're going to be adhering to as a group, as an academy, as a function. And then do you have a capability within the team currently, or do you need to start defining some new roles, new capabilities, and training those up? That's like the quickest, broadest brush stroke, which is a lot. It's a lot to throw at you. If you are interested, let us know. We can go into more detail on any one of these, or as a whole, on what should go into an L&D strategy. So if it's useful for you, if you're finding yourself fielding these kinds of conversations and wondering what should be going into these, we are more than happy to focus another webinar on that. So just let us know.
Yeah, I think the thing is that when we're hearing about strategy, what strategy actually means to us is it's almost like standing up a new line of business, right? Where you really are looking at what are we focused on? What are we not focused on? All of this, and any of these 9, 10 areas is essentially a work effort in of itself. And then there is the bit of how you bring it all together in roadmaps and plans. The distinction is specifically the distinction is that when you're talking about a strategy, whether it's 3-year, 5-year, your L&D org overall, is it's not necessarily talking about, or specifically isn't talking about, a specific training event or program or initiative. It sits above that. Now, included in the roadmap might be piloting, right? You might have pilots as part of that plan, but this sits above the pilot. So when we're getting to that second question of how do we meet the business need of right now, this is about specifically saying we have the business or somebody saying, hey, there's this training that we have to do right now. How do we make it fit in this world where we're all kind of virtual and working from home and socially distancing? So the difference is this is specifically a training. Maybe it's a training that needed to go out and it's being built anew, but you have to change it mid-flight or start from a new perspective. Maybe it's a training that you've always done or a program that you've always had that has ongoing participation, and all of a sudden it needs to be sort of refit, retooled. So this is about a specific program. What I think is absolutely awesome about this is it's forcing us into a pilot mindset, which we, designers high and low, anybody on this call probably inherently understands and has been part of a conversation before about how piloting is so important. Maybe you call it rapid prototyping, maybe you call it fail fast, maybe you call it test and learn, whatever it might be. But all of a sudden, there's this urgent business need right now that's forcing us into that mindset of let's do the pilot first, because we have to. And then we can look at how that fits into our strategy. I think that's amazing. I think we've always wanted to do that, but there's resistance to it for whatever reason, right? Hey, well, how does this fit into a strategy? Somebody's asking that question, or maybe even your vendor partner might be saying, wait, before we do that, what's your overarching strategy, right? So that resistance doesn't always come from within. It can come from your vendor partners as well. And now all of a sudden we're in this pilot mindset where there's a need right now. Let's fix it. Let's do it. Let's get to it. And then we can learn a whole bunch from it. I can't harp on how amazing I think that is.
So Jennifer asked, how would you redefine these new roles and build support for this? And I think that that is going to emerge. So as you are piloting, as you are experimenting, and you're keeping an eye on what's working and what isn't working, and you're interrogating why it isn't working, you're going to see whether you have the innate capability within the team or whether that's a capability that needs to be built out. I think there are, however, new roles that people may not consider for L&D teams, and we can go into that more, but there are certainly roles that you wouldn't necessarily align to an L&D team, which are now more and more appropriate. So, and that's more around data analytics, or even if you've pulled in, even if you can start pulling in social marketeers into a team. I think that's, we can go in, we can go into that far more, but they will emerge, Jennifer, and there are some core new roles to consider for that.
Yeah, absolutely. This may be, you may be the same person, whoever just asked that question. I think it might have been Lindsay. Whoever just asked that question may have also submitted this question, or at least I think has a similar, I think they're similar to this question that we had submitted, which is how do we help people who are actually in HR and L&D, so the people already within and responsible with those roles, engage and drive learning. And there's several factors here, right? There are the people who design, and they've got to invent and experiment and think differently. The upfront analysis, which once you're used to working with a certain audience or within a certain context or within a certain business, you can sort of rapidly go through the analysis of the learner, the context, and so on, because you have it around your head. But that has changed a lot now. What's the context in which people are learning is drastically different. So your designers have that challenge of needing to revisit and go back and take the time to do that. There's also the element of facilitation. And I think in facilitation, you're looking for people with holistically new skills. People who are good at facilitating in person are not necessarily good at facilitating through a virtual learning journey. You've got to consider things like online charisma, additional types of facilitators. Like we've got our colleague, Lindsay Warren, who is a freaking genius, and she's on here running all the technical stuff in the background. She's involved in the planning for this webinar just as much as we are as a facilitator. So we have to include those new types of facilitation roles and so on. And in facilitation, there's also definitely in design, and facilitation, there's planning for multiple paths, right? So maybe Patrick and I get halfway through this and we realize, oh no, we're running out of time. We've got to, pivot. That won't happen because Patrick will reach through the screen and tell me to hurry up. So there's planning for multiple paths through the learning. Like maybe we were going to do this as a group, but hey, it's not happening, so let's do it in breakout sessions, or vice versa, however it may happen. And then, so there's designing for that, but then there's also the facilitation skills of being able to improvise. And if you're uncomfortable with improvise, maybe you're more comfortable with smart adaptability. But those are different skills. So, and then there's even the managers who are involved. And I think, managers, we often, and I think we all, again, we all kind of know this, but we know managers often get promoted into their role not because of their management skills, but because they're good at the thing that people in that role need to do. And so they're moved into management, managing people who do that thing that they're good at doing. And so there's always a bit of a gap in having to help, not always, in most cases, there's a gap where you have to help managers learn what it is to manage, coaching, those kinds of skills. Well, all of a sudden, managers are going to need those kinds. They're going to need to do that in a virtual session or in a virtual world, I should say. Excuse me. So, how do you help people in HR and L&D engage and drive learning? I think you have to acknowledge the differences in the role, what's new, what needs to happen, where there are gaps, and then the people who the people who are above them or who in support positions with them need to be supporting those specific new kinds of skills. I think that's really the only answer. It's not fair to say all of a sudden we're in a different context, so just design differently. There's more support that needs to go into it than that. But I think it really does come down to how you're designing, how are you facilitating, and how are you supporting those managers.
There was a further clarification on the question from Jennifer around then what, so what does this mean in terms of in limited budgets? And I know that everybody's budgets are getting just destroyed right now. And, it comes down to prioritizing the service to the business first. In a world, in most design senses, in most blends, you can generally opt for a lo-fi or free tool. And there's a lot of design approaches that we do that doesn't have to be the full interactive video, and can be done with the tools that already exist. So I'd say but what it won't do when you are slashing budgets is give you more time. I think you're going to find in a world where budgets are slashed, the impact on your time as a designer and a delivery agent is going to be severely impacted. So how you prioritize that is going to be some hard conversations with your leadership.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I'll ask that you hold on to that question. I think we're going to get more into it by the nature of the rest of the webinar, but if we don't, hold us to it at the end.
And Carrie, you asked about culture. Look for the empathy conversation that we're going to be having later.
Which is actually right now. Brilliant. Well done, Patrick.
Right. It's like I planned that.
Yeah, so actually I'm going to let you take the first one, Patrick, because I know you and I have talked before and you've got a bit of a take on these practical skills.
Yeah, I've got a soft spot for all the technical trainers that are out there, and practical. How do you train practical skills? The things where the people actually have to touch, tweak, torque, hold to diagnose or understand the piece of machinery. And there's for engineers of that type, there is no getting around the being able to touch and feel something to really understand it. But that's not to say that video doesn't go a very long way, even handheld cams. And we're seeing pretty high-end manufacturers who are reverting to their head technician shooting a video about how to swap out that part, and that does go a long way. We're also seeing, interestingly, pop-up shops or pop-up workshops that are then being driven around to locations. That's going to be really hard for like the US, much easier in say Europe, but it is a way to start to do a hub and spoke sort of model where you can have the equipment, and maybe where the invigilation has to happen to test people out becomes mobile.
Yeah, that's a really cool concept, Patrick. I know you've done that with that's been part of a design for a couple of customers. I think we are even suggesting it right now to a couple auto manufacturers, and it's getting some big traction, including in testing and actually using it. People are loving the pop-up lab concept. Behavior change virtually. So my 2 cents on this, so my professional 2 cents, I'm not going to shortchange myself, is that we are in a world where we can measure behavior change. I mean, absolutely we are. The issue, I think, where this falls, and ends poorly in practice is when we end up looking at the behavioral indicators instead of the actual behavior. So maybe you've done a contact center call or a contact center agents, and you've explained that you're moving from customer service to customer engagement, and what those differences are, and the indicators are higher customer engagement scores, customer relationship scores, and so you see those scores go up and you think great. But if you look back at what people are actually doing, which requires observation, this is not automated yet, you might find out that what's actually happening is those people who are getting those really high scores are, and this actually did happen on a project, what was actually happening is the people who were getting the highest scores had gone into the system. They'd left people on hold an additional like 30 seconds-ish before answering the call, because to pull up all of this information, and they'd made some assumptions about what was happening and had all this information up and ready to go before even starting the call. So they left people on unanswered for longer, but they were more ready to help them and had their hand around it and were ready to engage. And that's not something we taught in the training. So we found out way more valuable information. So I do think we get into the trap of looking at behavioral indicators instead of behaviors.
I still think that when you are doing your design, Rose and I had a massive argument about this. I still think that when you are conceiving your design, you need to be looking at the indicators that are available to you in your organization. And you need to be at least aiming to move those indicators, to impact them with your design, and then go with your best effort on your design to see that performance has been modified in some form or fashion. It's then up to you to come back to it and say, was it the training? Was it the stuff? Was it the process that we outlined, or is it something else? But I still think in order for you to, you need to be faithful to the business and ensuring that you are at least aiming towards a change to business performance.
Yeah, and as Patrick and I argue more and more about this, we realize that we are saying things that work together, not things that are necessarily in disagreement. But you do have to have somebody with preternatural curiosity needs to look at the indicator and go, okay, so what's actually happening? And in a virtual world, that's a little bit more difficult, and it may, for the time being, it may be that you reach out to a performer specifically and go, hey, look, your ratings went up, I want to talk about what you're actually doing. Yeah, that may be the thing that you need to have happen because you're not necessarily able to walk the halls anymore. And then I love this one, and we promised we'd talk about empathy. How do we demonstrate empathy in virtual learning? So I do a lot of facilitation. One of my roles is as facilitator of sort of all things. And for me, there's a huge difference between teaching empathy, what we think of as teaching empathy, which is maybe we do use some stories, maybe we explain it, we talk about things like active listening, we do show some video maybe, but in my experience, and I'd be happy to do the research to get empirical about this, but in my experience, the only way to actually teach empathy is to model it, which means that your designers and your facilitators, the whole design has to be around being empathetic for your learners, because role modeling empathy is the best way to teach it. And what I mean by that, and we're going to talk about this, is a big theme in our next section here with the online learner archetypes, is meeting the person where they are instead of trying to get them to where you are. So it's, am I understanding where they are? Am I giving them stuff to support them where they are and moving along on the journey? Or am I just going in saying, I need you to be here? And with all best intentions, but that's what we're actually doing. So I find that role modeling and putting it into your design is the only way to get empathy across.
And I think that is, if you get that right, that goes back to, Carrie, to your question, you go a long way to changing the culture of the learning culture of the organization, because there is then a sense that you are appreciating the learner and that you are there to help them do their jobs better or to make sure that they are healthier in the work in the work environment. So you are reflecting their particular needs, which we think is critical.
In a virtual environment, role modeling empathy becomes just so much more, exponentially more important than simply teaching it. So let's talk about those online learner archetypes, because realistically, reaching them is all about empathy in your design and empathy in your facilitation. So we had questions. So this question here: how do you motivate lurkers or people who aren't engaged? We had this. That's our like archetype question, as it were. But the vast majority of the questions that we have gotten is something around this. People are not engaged. I've tried everything and people are still not motivated. I'm not, in virtual sessions for the most part. I'm like in virtual classrooms. They're not. How do I engage them? Blarg, help me. Vast majority of questions are that by a huge margin. And we said, okay, we're already looking into this. We already use archetypes in our design, in how we think about design. So let's put that together and share it out with all of you, since that does seem to be the question. So there are lots of ways to look at online presence and virtual learners. This research comes from an amalgamation of looking at gamer personas, online social presentation personas, learner personas in general, whether online or not, as well as our combined experience and what we know actually works, how we think about them. And this is all rooted in empathy. And what we know is that we tend to categorize online or virtual learners. That what's emerging is that we have learners in a virtual world who tend to get categorized by the type of activity, internal and external. So when we talk about internal activity here on the y-axis, we're talking about the internal cognitive process. So what goes on in the black box of someone's mind, right, while they're processing and making meaning of your content. External activity is around the social participation, what the learner is doing outside of him or herself to make meaning of the context. There's usually things you can see. So, all of you who are typing in questions right now, those kinds of things, responding to polls, participating overtly in the conversation, so on. And if you plot it, this is a classic relationship coordinate graph. So we can look at, break it down into these 4 quadrants and look at what we tend to see, or what we call these people going, if you're looking at people who have the high, we tend to make a lot of assumptions around people on internal activity. So we think if they're not if they have low external activity of any kind, we tend to see them as maybe disengaged or not participating. That if we don't see the evidence that there's not really much going on cognitively. And then if you look towards the right side and you see the higher level of external activity, then we're seeing, hey, these are people who are engaged, and we tend to think that. When in reality, if we break these down, which we're going to do, there's a lot more behind it. So here are the archetypes in a bit more detail. Patrick, I know you and I did this together with other people, so jump in. So the 4 archetypes that we're looking at are the achiever, the show person, the thinker, and the dormant. And the achiever is so these little emojis and their persona statements are, here's how to think of them, or here's what they may be actually thinking. So for the achiever, so somebody who has high internal and external activity, so they're thinking a lot and they're showing you a lot. That person's probably thinking, great, awesome, this learning, it works for me. This is the type of learning that works for me. I've got space to do it in my head and to practice externally. You hit them, you targeted, spot on. The show person, who has, if you're looking up here in the top corner.
Oh, me. The show person.
Oh, look at me. I desperately wanted to call this person the mansplainer, but that was sexist. The show person is, so we think of this person as, like this might be the person who talks a little bit too much. But in reality, what the show person is, could be any of these or any mixture of these, thinking, in this virtual world, maybe thinking, oh my goodness, I'm actually in a situation where I have human contact. I'm in a social situation. I'm super happy. This might be the person who is thinking, my boss will see me. So there's that pressure to just say, look, my boss is going to see me and I'm going to get more, kudo points by just being active, regardless of how meaningful that activity is externally. And then the person who feels like they have to, who might not, this might be a little bit fear-based. I don't really want to engage in and participate in these social things you have set up, but I'm going to because I feel like it's just part of my job on any list. So those are the two who have the high external activity, regardless of what's going on internally. Then you've got the thinker and the dormant. So the thinker is the person who's here in the upper left-hand quadrant. So they've got really low external activity. You're not seeing them do much. They might be dead silent, but they've got very high internal activity, meaning they're probably processing and absorbing, right? So you've got something around, hey, you might have the shy person who's thinking, this is really good stuff. This is great, I'm learning, but please don't make me talk or participate, right? You got the person who's like, I'm here, I'm processing. That's just how I do. I need that time. And you might have the person who's like, I just need more information. I don't have my head around it yet, so I can't participate. That's just not how I do. You may also in this category have the person who's just flat out needs, and we'll talk about this more, but flat out is absorbing because later they're going to do something with it, and that's just their process. And then you have the dormant, low external and low internal. I think we're all kind of scared of this person, but I want to dispel some things about some misconceptions about this person, because we have found in our research that often this is the person, yes, this may be the person who's thinking, oh yeah, a virtual learning session, I could totally just dip out and take a break, right? I don't have to participate. That may be the case. But you may also have a person who is in cognitive load, a little bit of burnout. Maybe they're in the middle of a big project and it's just flat out inconvenient, or they can't get their head around it because they can't break free or lose what they're holding to achieve another task. And you might also, in the dormant, it might be the person who's thinking, I don't need this. I'm already doing this. This feels remediative for me. And they may be right. Or just this doesn't work for me. So these are our 4 types.
So Amir asked the question, are these a bit like learning styles? And then I'll follow with Jennifer's question about, what are there percentages or buckets of people? And so it's a model. So it's a model in as much as learning styles is, though learning styles has been debunked over time. The thing about this learner archetypes is that this changes. It's quite a volatile state. So it will change based upon the projects that you have on, maybe the topic that's being covered, the fact that your partner might be having particular issues, whatever it is. It's very transitory. And so it is less sort of fixed thinking than the learning styles. And so back to Jennifer's question, which is, are there percentages or buckets, and how many would we consider? It changes. And I think importantly, we're going to go into this in a little bit. We're going to do an even deeper dive on each one of these. Is to know that these will change. Your achiever isn't going to be your achiever every single time.
Okay.
Even though they're awesome and you would love to have an entire class full of achievers, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And in all likelihood, yes, there will be a general bell curve looking spread across any virtual session or virtual learning that you do. But it would be very wrong to think that those, if you plotted it out and put all the dots in all the quadrants for representing all your people, that those people would be the same, that the dot would be the same person every time.
Yeah.
My dot, I know for a fact, I move way over into the achiever when I'm doing a webinar, but when Patrick and I are having the conversations beforehand about sorting through your questions and so on, I can tend to drop a little bit into a thinker and just sit back and listen for a while, right? So it really depends, and those dots move. I think one of the big important messages around this is your perception of their engagement does not equal their actual engagement. They may be fully cognitively engaged, right there with you, loving it, it's spot on, they're getting what they need, but they're not really doing anything, a whole lot externally. So you're thinking they're not engaged, but in reality, they're actually doing it and they're there with you. So let's talk about them each in a bit more. So the achiever, the indication, the indicator. So so put yourself in the mind of I'm actually in a session, I'm facilitating something. We've got some virtual learning journey or a social cohort or something going on. This would be somebody who has high external contribution, like you're seeing it, so that high external activity. And those interactions are thoughtful, right? There are things that show they're really digesting and thinking about the content. Patrick made a great point to me earlier about this is also the substance of this person's comments and contents and contributions may in fact sort of represent or push the whole class along or the whole cohort along. Their attributes are usually this is a person who's processing things internally and externally, kind of equal footing in that regard. They're not overly shy, or at least they have some high level of motivation for the content or what's going on. They're probably preternaturally engaged in the way that we think of engaged, and they may even be naturally competent. But I think the biggest thing is those indicators that they're contributing, but the contribution has substance and it's not lacking. The misconceptions we have, and you'll see this first one in all of these, is that they're always like this. We also, I think we have misconceptions that this is the person who is like the absolute best learner. We want everyone to be like her. They're going to be a high performer and they're going to make me look good. And that probably is true. They are going to make you look good, but that doesn't mean the other ones don't. I think it's critical there. And then how to design for or manage. This is probably not the learner you need to spend most of your time worrying about in the design. If they're, if you're thinking about this as a preternaturally engaged person or somebody who's going to get, who's well into it, they're probably have a higher level of motivation to be involved in whatever it is you're going to put forth. But I also think that one thing that's really critical about them is that you can look to them for how they're actually doing the work. What's the performance in practice? Can you glean anything from them? The thinker the indicator here is they've got a low contribution, but later there's proof of competency. So you might not have seen them doing a lot of external activity, but they are, when you go and look at has behavior changed, are they doing something, then you see some proof. And that's the only way you know. And then so there's probably the person who processes internally. They're possibly shy. They're receptive. The misconceptions we have, again, that someone who's like this is always like this. They're going to be like this in all of the events. If they're not talking, then they're not engaged. They're going to be a bad performer. The big misconception is I've got to make them engage. I've got to make them do external things. And we may think of them as sullen and unfriendly. How to design for them? Again, probably not the learner you need to spend most of your time on. They inherently are knowing how they need to do it and getting to it for themselves. And I think the advice here is to change your perception, or at least investigate their performance before you assume anything.
Now, I think, challenge to everybody out there, I think that this is the one that you probably are most concerned with. The questions that we get is how to get these people more active. And we are saying that this is the archetype that you probably can forget in your design.
Yeah, or like this is like, don't rejigger your whole design for this person.
Yeah.
Similarly, the dormant. I like this, Jennifer. Respect the introverts. Absolutely. The dormant. So the dormant is probably the one that we think anyone who's on the low external is. So this is the only indicator you have here that they're not engaged is that later you have proof that they weren't paying attention, because you don't know. I mean, just because they weren't doing anything external doesn't mean they weren't absorbing and processing and getting this internal to themselves. So you need to look at later proof before you make that assumption. Attributes is, again, this is not necessarily the person who's just entering into the training and being like, well, I don't want to do it. And I just want a break and I'm looking for the excuse to disengage. That's not always the case. This could be a person who just doesn't have the mental space, right? The person who actually legitimately needs a break, or the person who already gets it and knows it and is like, well, I gotta put my butt in the seat so you can check a box. So the only real indicator is that later they weren't paying attention, and later you see that they aren't competent in something or missed something. The attributes are they may be tired or burnt out. Realistically, they need a break. They can't take it anymore. They already know this content or are doing the things that you want them to do. They may honestly, genuinely need a break, or they may be on their way out. The person could be disengaging from the company. And I think that's the one that we all kind of fear, the assumption. The misconceptions we have, same one, they're always like this, but also that they're completely disengaged, that this is an indicator of how they are all the time. That they're a bad worker, a bad performer, and that we have to redesign the whole thing to reach them. But when we are talking about design, this is the one where you may need to revisit. Is what you've designed for actually what they need? So back to empathy, back to what they need. If you have somebody who's if you have people who are the learner archetype of dormant and they're in there because they've got other priorities, they may need a different approach. They may need something quicker. They may need to be allowed to take it again at a different time. So this is the one where you can revisit and say, okay, are we getting this? I like Lee's question, is this a skill versus will situation, the dormant? And that's what I'm saying, is it might be. It could be either. I think we assume quickly that this is a skill issue. And that they just can't, a will issue that they don't want to, when in reality, it could be, there's many blockers to engagement. Then the other question is, do they really need this training? Which you can really only find out by coaching or looking at their performance later. The other thing you can do is ask them to help facilitate, which is kind of mean if there's somebody who doesn't have the time and space to be careful with it. But then also, and this one's very important, let them go. If you have somebody who's disengaging overall, it's not worth upending your design. I will say this wholeheartedly. It sounds very severe. It is not worth upending your whole design to get to the few people who may be in there who are on their way out and disengaged. That's a different problem. And that's not necessarily for training. And then I know we're getting so close to the end, and we are close to the end, but the show person, in my opinion, this is the hardest one. The show person, this is the person who has high contribution, but it may be slightly off. So they're talking, they're engaged, there's lots of external activity, but it may not be the most substantive or relevant. The attributes, they tend to be people who are excited for social interaction. So yes, you're getting more towards people who are extroverted. Attributes may also be people who need validation or who have a little bit of fear around not contributing, and that's their impetus. Misconception, same one as for everyone, that we assume they're like this all the time. But also we have a misconception that this person is engaged and they're the best learner and they're going to make me look good and everybody needs to be like him or her, or they're going to be a high performer. And then I think there is a subset here to be really careful of. Sometimes the person who's sometimes the show person is in fact struggling to understand. And they do that externally. So I think you have to compensate for that as well. And that's where at the bottom, you'll see the very bottom here is to feedback and involve the manager. They may need something more one-on-one. Like this person's struggling and may need some support. That's another version of the show person. But in general, this gets, again, to empathy, meet them where they are, reassure them. You can actively call on others. In face-to-face training, this is the person that as they're talking, I would be approaching slowly. Because if you approach somebody, you get closer to them, they kind of shut down a bit. You can't do that virtually. So you have to do it in other ways. Maybe overtly calling them out and saying, thank you, you've contributed a lot, Patrick. Yeah. And then call on others. This is also a person who can probably help you facilitate, get them to do a breakout group or ask them to learn something and then do a session.
That's true. Joseph's got a great question. Now, given that we've got these archetypes, what is the impact of this on the emphasis or nature of the training, the timing of an evaluation approach? And so if it's training evaluation, I think it does have an impact. I think you've got to look at, you have to consider all of these to then look at what is the what is the usefulness, utility of the training program and what impact it's having. But if you're looking at larger performance change, I think you're going to take that more longitudinally anyway. And I think it might be worth it you come back when you're looking at impact down to the individual level. It might be worth coming back and verifying the archetypes against the business impact strategy that you've got on the training program. But I would say that might be a level of detail too much.
Yeah, I think there's a way we can fit this to our mental schema of a training evaluation that we do now, where we tend to look at, we tend to check that somebody has actually touched the learning, that they've completed an assessment, and they were there, that they did it. And we know that aside from like a compliance regulation audit trail, those data are kind of useless. They don't actually mean anything about learning. That is tenfold true, or exponentially true, whatever. Somehow very much more true in that those metrics are invalid. And that's what I'm saying. So think about the validity is how much is this measuring the thing you're stating that you're claiming that it measures, and it doesn't. Somebody's external activity in a virtual learning session or social learning session is not a reliable indicator of their learning, and that's just even more so. And I know we're at the very end, so let me be really clear. Your perception of their engagement does not equal their actual engagement. That's kind of what I want to take away from this. And then you want to go through these super fast, Patrick?
Yeah, we certainly can do. So questions around do we recommend creating these archetypes? Absolutely. I think they're really good. It's a really good model for you to be able to also talk about your design and why your design is evolving the way it is to non-learning people.
And you can use these archetypes as a starting point for making personas, but remember that your personas need to be real people. So you might take a person in role and add, layer them in, and just make that archetype one part of the persona.
And on the next set of questions, it's which are the hardest to engage? I think we've already talked about that. How many should you have? Well, whatever is appropriate for you, but we think that it's probably 3-4 archetypes at a minimum, probably no more than six. Yeah. I'd say you're gonna just confuse things. You're getting too detailed at 6.
Yeah. And if you do more than 6, you're gonna realize, oh, I need more than 6. I need more types of training, because you're getting down to the nitty-gritty. How can I activate or motivate silent students? Tried a whole bunch of everything. It doesn't motivate them. I think, again, to the point, you got to go back and check that that's the right modality for them. Look, again, consider those archetypes. What works? What virtual learning techniques work best for all archetypes? Empathy for all of the archetypes.
Yeah, empathy as your mantra underneath everything that you do. Create blends that enable people to be able to reflect and to engage with the content sort of at their pace and in their time.
Yeah, and the answer to the second one, what are some methods of instruction that best reach across those archetypes? Blended learning. So go get the other webinar. Blended learning is the way to do it. And then, does this inevitably involve creating multiple learning journeys? Patrick, you had an answer to this that was fabulous.
I mean, my God, don't do it. If you're thinking about doing multiple learning journeys for every one of your archetypes, you're going to kill yourself and you're going to kill the business. The business isn't going to tolerate it. So no, just create one blend and accept that you might lose some people, but that you are doing the best design to meet the widest number of people that you can.
Yeah. So I can't answer all these right now because we're at the top of the hour, and I sincerely apologize. We will answer these in a communication out. We're going to also carry forward into the next webinar. So questions about design and tools, we will absolutely. The key messages we wanted to leave you with, the top 2 are my contribution. In a virtual or online world, engagement is your perception, not their reality. And then meet people where they are, not where you want or assume them to be. So this is about having empathy for your learners in a very real way that we don't normally do, and then design around with that empathy.
Be brave. and go forth and pilot. You are in a world of experimentation right now, so take advantage of it. And make sure that as you're piloting, you're getting good feedback, and that's informing what you're going to do tomorrow.
And then before we go, there's our latest insight. It's also in the handouts.
Yep.
And
it's available as a PDF, so you can download it now. And stay tuned for our next one. Lindsay, thank you very much for producing today's webinar. And Rose, thank you very much. And I very much want to thank every one of you for your active involvement in this. It's been lovely to have you on. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to know more, if you want us to go deeper on the learner archetypes, get more practical, get deeper with them, please go ahead and leave that in comments or responses, because if we get enough, then Patrick and I have our business case to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. And we will definitely follow up on the questions we didn't get to.
Yeah. Take care. Hello, welcome back. I say welcome back. It's because we are doing a continuation of our webinar recording. Virtual Learning Journeys, a focus on the emerging learner. We're doing a continuation because we ran out of time, and we have a couple of more questions that were posed by people who joined the webinar. So we want to make sure that we answered them and that we get it up there for you all to have. My name is Patrick Thomas, and I'm joining you from London. And with me is Rose Benedicts, who is joining from the US.
Yep, thanks, Patrick. So in the webinar, we just went through the different learner archetypes that we're seeing emerge, and some of the specific questions we had around that were the ones we didn't get to around were design and tools. So we'll start with the design questions, which is, what is a more agile methodology of delivering learning programs in a virtual or reimagined setting? First of all, I love the word reimagined. That's a fantastic word. So I think the agile methodology in here is, and we talked a bit about that we're in a situation in which we have a pilot mentality, because we're having to meet business needs right now in our programs, and sort of reimagining them for a virtual world, a virtual way of working, and virtual delivery, I guess, is the point there. And so I think just having that mentality of let's get something out, let's redesign it and do it because there's a need for right now, puts us into a pilot mentality, and that already introduces some agility. I think there's also you have to give yourself a moment to retool if needs be. So if you put out a virtual session or put out design something for a social cohort, then you need to be have the mindset of being in sort of perpetual beta. Like, it's out there, I just ran it, this is what happened. Next iteration of it, next time I run it, I'm going to make these adjustments because I've learned from it. So we are, I think, in a world where we are a little bit more tolerant of that, which is great.
Yeah, agreed. This second question, which is around, how do we enable people, say our customer success partners? How do we motivate and empower our customers to deliver, encourage them to deliver L&D programs in this new way? So this is about building confidence and excitement in this new way of learning and this new way of participating. There is, in this world of innovation and in this world of try it and pilot, I think it goes a long way to still be able to talk about success stories, talk about the benefits of the program that will help you build support. For those people that are having to do the delivery in a new way, so for those people that are having to deliver using new technologies that they're not comfortable with, and it might feel awkward, it helps to record sessions, do train the trainer sessions with them. It also helps to talk about your own failures and say that the first time you ran this, you completely cocked it up, and there's no way that you're going to do any worse than say I've already done in this. Or talk about where something went askew, but you pulled it back. So when people start to imagine what's the worst, it makes it easier for them to go and experiment.
Yeah. So if you think that design and delivery takes new skills in this new world order, then you also have to acknowledge that those who are supporting those who design and deliver to success also need new skills and need to be supporting the development of those new skills. So spot on, Patrick.
Yeah.
The second set of questions that we missed or didn't get to were around tools. The first one is around when we're limited to Zoom, and you can sort of put whatever technology you're limited to, right? It might not be Zoom. When limited to whatever virtual classroom technology you're using, aside from breakout groups, what other approaches are there to drive engagement? What virtual low-cost whiteboarding tools do you recommend? So I actually love Padlet. It's a great tool for all kinds of whiteboarding, brainstorming. You can write things up and down. You can do it collaboratively. So check out that, see if it works. But what I find myself doing the most, and what really does work, is I actually find the vast majority of my time in designing for a virtual session is designing a framework into which the participants are going to do the work. So I may develop a framework that says something like, here are the main skills that we all need. And then next to that is, what do these skills break down to in terms of observable behaviors? And we all do that together. And what do we think are the barriers to that? And so I have this table or framework into which we can work. And that takes a lot of, you have to trust yourself. And that framework that I build may look different. It may look like a picture, it may worksheet, whatever it is, but I design that. And then that becomes the tool that we use instead of just assuming that a whiteboard technology is going to do it.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. There's the technique of even emailing. You and I just ran a session where we had emails queued up and we were sending emails to individuals, and they had to react to the emails during the session. So we used basic email as a way to engage learners and keep them on their toes. Another way to do it is just use your camera. This is also a really good way of doing it, or typing into, as a facilitator, typing in what people are saying. When you're, it takes a lot of bravery to be the one to facilitate and to type in what people are saying, but it also enables you to clarify your own misunderstanding, and it might also encourage additional conversations. Now, Rose, you are the queen of this. You are the one who taught me how to do this. I think you are the bravest person that I know to be able to do that. And I have seen virtual workshops change because of a spelling error, because of a miscommunication that's typed up in a very public way like that.
Yeah.
And starts the conversation in a really interesting way.
I love the compliment. Thank you for it.
You're welcome.
It's a matter of just having no ego about it. Just go, I'm going to put it up there. If it's mistyped and it's all wrong, then actually that's good, because it takes the dialogue to where it needs to go to get it right.
Yeah. This follow-up question here, which is around, are there tools to activate the silent students? We talked in the recording that is going to be alongside this one about showing empathy and tools to support learners. Now, if you've used all the tools at your discretion, so if you've used the polling and the survey, if you've asked the questions, and you're using the video to the best that you can.
You've tried our email suggestion. You've tried frameworks.
And everybody is quiet and nobody is participating, that might be an indicator that your design approach is not landing, and you might need to go back to the design approach. If you're asking this question because you are still concerned about the odd silent person, think about the archetypes and think about the fact that they might be internally processing.
Yeah, good shout out. Great. And then we did do this in the main body of the webinar, but we did it so quickly. Patrick suggested we hit it again, which good, again, good. The first two were the key messages that were near and dear to me, that in this virtual or online world, when you're creating virtual learning journeys, what we tend to do is, as we talk about whether or not someone's engaged, and that's usually based on our perception and not on that learner's reality. They may be fully cognitively engaged, but not, participating externally to themselves, because that's just not how they learn, or they're not there yet, or they're considering something, they're mulling it over, they're preternaturally shy, so on. So I think one of the key messages is get rid of that perception that if someone is not doing a lot of external activity that you can see, they're not engaged. That's just not true. The second one is to meet people where they are and not where you want or assume them to be. It works in tandem with what I just said. So, when you're looking at, building or designing something for delivery in an online or social way, it's about making sure you've considered the archetypes, and that there are going to be people who fall into those, in addition to your personas, fall into those archetypes, and meet them where they are. If somebody needs information, an example would be if somebody just needs the information, they just need it up front first and to mull on it for a while, go right ahead. That's fine. Don't force them to participate. That just may, hinder their learning. A great example that we're actually doing right now is there's a company that we're working with that does a lot of fast-moving consumer goods, and we are training them on use of a new system, a new customer relations system, like a new version of so something like Salesforce. And eventually, it's supposed to enable them to have different behaviors around engaging with the consumer when they're on the phone or on email or so on. And that training, we identified that actually the very first touch point, which is a virtual session, needs to be just space to show them the system, so they can start alleviate fear of, oh my gosh, this is a huge change, this is going to be terrible, I don't have any faith in it. All of those fears when somebody says you're switching to a new system, that we're not going to force them to participate and contribute or whatnot yet. There has to be space, whether it's 20 minutes or an hour, whatever it is, just to address that. Here you go. We know you need to see it and get your head around it.
Yeah. We talked a lot about this pilot world that we're in. It's a world of experimentation. It's a world of, I'm going to try it, and be brave. So absolutely experiment. Tell people that you're experimenting. Tell your business partners, we're going to give this a go. We have no idea if this is going to work or not, but we've got a good reason to give it a try. And this is what we're looking to achieve in doing that. And trust yourself. So give yourself some space in your design thinking to not have the noise of delivery, and think about, what would I do differently that is unique to these people? What do you think is going to make people react best? What is the tool set that you're going to give them that's going to help them do their jobs easier? So be brave, trust yourself. You'll do it. You'll do a great job in this world of experimentation. And we're piloting. Note all of your successes and note all of your failures, and failures are a good thing, because when you've noted them and you start to see trends, that becomes an indicator of where your strategy needs to be adapted. Yeah. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, I love what you said, Patrick, and I'm so glad that I forced us to write it on the slide, because it was solid gold that we're in a place where perfect has sort of gotten out of the way of good.
Yeah,
which is actually quite wonderful for progress. Yeah. So as to that, thank you very much. I'm sorry that we didn't have time to cover it all. I hope we've done you justice by covering these in a little ancillary session. Feel free to reach out to us. These are our emails, and we had a really good time doing this research and sharing it with you.
It was great. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.